What if I told you about a system that was so perfect, it completely broke? A logistics network so good, so efficient, that its own perfection was the very thing that brought it down. Yeah, it sounds crazy. And that's the story of the Pathfinder Paradox.
Just think about this for a second. What if shipping a package was as easy as sending an email? I mean, really think about it. No tracking numbers to worry about, no packages stuck in customs for weeks. Just poof, a seamless, almost invisible river of stuff flowing around the world just like data on the internet. Well, that was the incredible promise of a system they called Pathfinder.
Okay, so before we dive into how amazing Pathfinder was, we really need to get our heads around the world it came from. You have to understand what it replaced. People called it an age of friction, and for good reason. The whole game back then wasn't about speed. Nope, it was all about control.
Literally, everything was built around this one idea. Every single checkpoint, every huge central warehouse, they all served one purpose: inspection. It was a place for someone to look, to check, to control. The goal wasn't how fast can we get this from A to B. The goal was how can we maintain absolute, total control over every single thing that moves.
And as you can probably guess, these old school systems, with their giant central hubs and all these mandatory checkpoints, they were just slow, super slow. And what's worse, if one of those big hubs went down, the entire network could just stop. It was a total mess. So they weren't just inefficient, they were also incredibly fragile. The bottlenecks were a feature, not a bug.
Right, so out of all that sludge, all that friction, this incredible new idea started to take shape. The promise of a perfect system, a true logistical utopia. And its name was Pathfinder. So here's the absolute genius of it. For Pathfinder, a physical box wasn't a box. It was just a packet of data that needed to be routed. It basically took everything we learned from the internet, how it's decentralized, how it's redundant, how it finds the fastest path, and just applied all of that to the real physical world. A total game changer.
And the way it worked, honestly, it was mind-blowing. First, an item would get completely disassembled into thousands, maybe millions of tiny, anonymous parts. Then, these little bits were just injected into the network. And here's the cool part. Each tiny piece would find its own fastest way to the destination, totally independent of all the others. And then at the end, they'd all arrive and be flawlessly put back together. Seriously, to anyone watching, it looked like actual magic.
So you're probably wondering, how on earth was it so efficient? Well, it's because Pathfinder tapped into something called shadow capacity. Think about it. All the empty space in cars, in delivery drones, on buses and trains, even in people's backpacks. Pathfinder used all of it. Every person, every vehicle, just going about their day became a tiny potential piece of this huge, unknowable delivery network. And that right there is the absolute key. The system was a black box, and that was on purpose. It was designed to be unknowable. No single carrier, not you, not a drone, nobody ever knew where the little piece they were carrying came from or where it was ultimately going. This complete and total darkness, this opacity, that was the secret sauce. That's what made it so secure and ridiculously efficient. But you knew there was a but coming, right? Inside this perfect machine, there was a ghost, a fatal flaw. And it wasn't a bug, it wasn't some hacker's backdoor. No, it was baked right into its DNA, an inescapable part of its very logic. And this, my friends, is where our utopia starts to crumble. It's a really good question when you think about it. How do you compromise a system that's, perfect? If there's no central server to attack, no single weak point to exploit, how in the world could you ever break it? Well, you don't. You just use it, exactly as it was intended. And that's the paradox in a nutshell. The bad guys didn't have to hack Pathfinder. They didn't need to search for some hidden weakness. They figured out that the system's greatest strength, the fact that it was totally anonymous and decentralized, was also its most profound weakness. Just let that sink in for a minute. It means that illegal stuff could be broken down into tiny, harmless-looking little parts, fed into the network, just like anything else, and then reassembled on the other side. The general public, the people just using the system to get their groceries, they became the unwitting delivery drivers for a massive, invisible, and terrifyingly efficient ghost supply chain. This is the core of it, right here. The system's perfect efficiency was the very thing that made it perfectly compromised. The one feature that was supposed to make it invincible, its total opacity, its decentralization, was the exact same feature that made it impossible to control, impossible to police. To the algorithm running the show, one packet of data looked exactly like any other. And this brings us to the end game. The final, really destabilizing price of this logistical utopia. Because what happens? What is the real cost when a society creates a perfect system that it absolutely cannot control, but also can't live without? They found themselves in a trap, a state that experts call infrastructural entrapment. See, Pathfinder wasn't a luxury anymore. It was essential. Everything from food to medicine to, well, everything depended on it. So shutting it down? Absolutely unthinkable. But letting it run? That meant you had to accept that this untouchable criminal ghost supply chain was now just a permanent part of your world.
So the trade-off here is just brutal. On one hand, you got the promise, a totally frictionless, optimized world. But the price for that was a system nobody could govern. You got the promise of maximum efficiency, but the price was a society where nobody trusted each other, where your neighbor could be an unwitting accomplice. And you got the promise of total privacy and opacity, but the price for that was the government losing control completely. And the fallout from that last one is huge. The state's fundamental power to control its own borders, to say, this is allowed in, this isn't, it basically just evaporated. What's the point of a checkpoint? What's the point of customs when illegal goods can be broken into a million little pieces and flow right through the country, completely unseen?
So it all comes down to this one kind of haunting question, doesn't it? When a system becomes too perfect to fail, has it, in a way, already failed? The story of the Pathfinder Paradox, it's really a warning for us. It forces us to look at our own world, at our own race to build perfectly efficient, perfectly frictionless systems, and ask a very serious question. What ghosts are we building into our own machines?